I'm joined on set by Diptyque Laurent for the main stories of the day. Diptyque, hi.
Hi, Olivia.
Let's start with a war of words between France and Italy on Europe's migrant crisis.
A pretty nasty war of words, it must be said. The new Italian government, of course, earlier this week turned back a boat carrying over 600 refugees, saying it was up to Malta to take them in. Malta refused, and now Spain, of course, has ended up taking in the boat. But it's led to a naval battle. That's what Libero, which is an Italian daily newspaper, says on its front page. And the paper explains in a rather snarky way that Emmanuel Macron accused Italy of being irresponsible. Matteo Salvini, the Italian prime minister, in turn, called France a bunch of hypocrites, saying up until now, Europe was happy to, quote, unload the responsibility on Italy to deal with sea rescues and the migrants. Well, no longer.
Well, in terms of a response, what are you seeing from the French papers?
Well, we've seen a bit of criticism, Olivia, from the French left-leaning press. Libération says Europe has gone adrift, as you see there on its front page, warning that if EU leaders don't want the continent to self-destruct, they must conserve the values of open borders. Now, there's a bit of cynicism from Kak, who's a cartoonist for the right-wing paper L'Opinion. In his front page illustration there, you see Emmanuel Macron telling the rescue ship that if there's anyone capable of climbing up 4 stories of a building, they're welcome to France. Of course, reference to Mamadou Gassama, who was awarded French citizenship after rescuing a child from a balcony recently.
That was a spectacular story. Now we're moving to the UK, where MPs have voted on the bill to formally withdraw from the EU.
And that was a success. Now, it's a really confusing situation. MPs went to vote on what is Theresa May's flagship EU withdrawal bill yesterday, and she narrowly avoided defeat. But in order to do that, the embattled British Prime Minister was forced to make major concessions by Conservative pro-European MPs. These include a new amendment that would require the government to find a deal by next year, or essentially allow pro-Brexiteers to guide negotiations afterwards. Hence, this rather mitigated headline from The Sun, "May the farce be with you." For pro-Brexit MPs, May has watered down her key Brexit promises. For the Remainers, she's essentially given them veto rights on Brexit negotiations. And basically, the idea is that she is the big loser from all of this. As you see in this cartoon here, a cartoon that might remind you of a similar scene from the weekend from the G7 conference when Angela Merkel and Western leaders faced off against Donald Trump. Well, this time, Theresa May is in the hot seat.
Well, indeed, speaking of Donald Trump, there's been a lot of reactions to Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un's historic summit in Singapore.
Very, very positive reactions, as you can imagine, from the Korean press. Let's show you the official newspaper from the communist paper there, the Rodong Sinmun, which hails what it calls the meeting of the century, while the Jungang Daily, a South Korean paper, says a new chapter begins, although in its opinion pages, the paper warns that the real game begins now.
There's a bit more cynicism, I think, from the US, from the American press.
Well, as always, the New York Daily News isn't holding back with a very visual front page. As you see here, the Gospel of Don the Evangelist, according to the Trumpinthians, a made-up passage from the Bible with love being state-sponsored murder, enslavement, torture, rape, etc. The paper criticizing the lack of discussions, indeed, on North Korea's human rights record at that summit in Singapore, while The Atlantic, the magazine, calls it a propaganda victory for Kim Jong-un, who not only got a meeting with Trump, something his predecessors could never get, he also got to end the much-despised US-South Korean war games. After the summit yesterday, he's gone from international pariah to something of a legitimate member of the international community.
Indeed, we didn't think we were going to see that. Now, finally, while the world's eyes were turned to Singapore yesterday, people in Minnesota were focused on something quite different, obsessed with a raccoon that's climbed 20 stories of an office building. Tell us more.
That's right. The plight of this little raccoon has gotten St. Paul, Minnesota in a frenzy. It's raised the prospect of a collective national heart attack, the Washington Post says. The little raccoon somehow got onto this building, scaled around 20 stories of this skyrise in St. Paul. seemingly unfazed by the dangers involved. Now the raccoons' movements are being tracked nationwide. There's a live stream on Twitter set up by a local TV station. Twitter users posting messages praying for the raccoon's safety. I even found an article on the morphology of raccoons so you can better understand how he's managed to climb up the building. The fire department is trying to lure the little guy back up to the rooftop so they can take him to safety. No doubt when he does come down, he'll get a hero's welcome, as this Twitter user has posted.
A raccoon who perhaps takes himself for Spider-Man. Laurent, thank you very much for joining us.